into this stuff.
Yeah.
In about 2006, I started really getting interested in the YouTube videos about Nibiru is here, Nibiru is here, and they were giving sky coordinates for Google Sky Earth and for worldwide telescope, and I think there's 2 or 3 other free things, and I was actually looking these things right up on the internet, and everywhere it said look for, NASA or someone else had blanked out what the whole image looked like. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just clearing my throat. Sorry about that, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that don't make any sense to me. Even though I've had some trolls come to me and try to make up good excuses for it, it's still no
Right.
excuse for it.
Well, I sent those coordinates, sky coordinates, into a friend of mine that's still at NASA. Can't mention his name or anything else about him. And he sent me back a DSS. This is an image of what you would physically see through a telescope. And this image is on your web page, probably in your chat room, where you have 5, almost 6 white dots orbiting around something. Okay, that really kind of set me going here. Okay, cool, because everything I mostly had read or heard about brown dwarf stars said a brown dwarf cannot be seen unless you're using infrared or microwaves.
Now, let me give you just really quick a good argument that somebody has made with me. Somebody who I've classified as a troll. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
they did bring up one good point, and that is even an object that you would need infrared to see. If it got close enough, once it got close enough, like even like near where Jupiter is, I mean, we could see Jupiter because light reflects off it. So if it got
Sure.
close enough, we'd be able to see it, right?
Yes, and it really works for something solid that had physically come into our system. Okay, now we're stepping into a different part here. We're going to be talking about Nemesis. NASA actually imaged a lot of this stuff back in 2007, 2008, where they actually have a infrared image of our brown dwarf companion to our sun. It's called Nemesis. Nemesis has its own little system. Its system has 7 planets. Believe it or not, it does. The brown dwarf system, being a companion to our sun, orbits around our sun over a long period of time, like 26,000 years, as it makes one complete orbit around our sun. Its 7 planets, only a few of those planets actually interact with our solar system. 2 of them that I know of right now is Nibiru, is planet number 6, and Sedna is the outermost planet of Nemesis. Sedna has been actually being seen on several astronomy programs. I use astroviewer.com. And in AstroViewer, I took several of the images and I sent them to your show so the visitors and listeners can actually see what AstroViewer shows. It shows that Sedna has a massive orbit all the way around our system, and our system is down towards one corner of Sedna's orbit. And that's all explained when you go to YouTube and look for a video about Nemesis, the evil twin to our sun. It's about a 50-minute video, and they go into it in complete detail. They talk about Nemesis, and they talk about exactly what the system would look like, which is a direct match for what I show in the stuff I have.
Fantastic. Now, I've seen the picture with the objects that you were just talking about, and that is up on the website, so everyone can go. If you're in the chat and listen page, where it's probably where you are, if you're listening, then scroll down, you'll see a picture slider, and those pictures are in that slider for you to check out. Now, how do we know what that is, what that's a picture of? How do we know?
Okay. All you see in those pictures is the orbit of Sedna. Sedna has a tremendous orbit, and it's virtually round. The only thing that will give it a round orbit is if it's orbiting around something. So something is missing right in the middle of that orbit. Another group made created a PowerPoint slide set of 8 slides a while back in 2009. Can't mention their name, from leaked information from NASA. And in those slides, they show the 6 planets which orbits around Nemesis, the brown dwarf. And 1 through 8 takes you from 2009 till December 21st of 2012. As of 2012, Nibiru, which was planet number 6, was only about 20 AUs. That's astronomical units, which is like from the Earth to the Sun, 93 million miles for 1 AU. And it said in there, it projected that Nibiru would be that far away as of December 21st, 2012. So if you take that image right there, put that within, I'm going to try and have that done pretty soon, and it'll clearly show all 7 planets in this one system.
Now I'm looking at the pictures now as they slide through, and so these graphs, who made these graphs with the orbits and such?
Those were made by another group, which I can't get into,
okay,
because stuff was created by them.
That's fine, but you know who created them, though.
Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
And they clearly show all the planets orbiting 1 through 8. You can clearly see all 6 planets as they slowly orbit around Nemesis. Now, for them to know that as well as they could to create what they had, they got fantastic information from NASA. And the person at NASA doesn't want anyone to know who that person is. So our governments around the planet have known about this since at least 1954. President Eisenhower made a big mistake back then. He personally invited the Bishop of Los Angeles, Francis M. McIntyre, to be his spiritual advisor at a very secret meeting down in what used to be called Muroc Airfield. It's now called Edwards Air Force Base. That is where Eisenhower met with a hand-picked Western team of scientists. They met with 3 alien races they had set down. Supposedly, one was the Greys, the second was a reptilian-looking race, the third was an interdimensional race called the Etherians. Now, how do I know this? After the 2-day meeting, everyone had to sign sworn statements they would never talk about anything. The bishop went straight back to Rome and told Pope Pius XII everything he saw and heard. And there was another person there. He created a really nice letter right after he got back home. He was there with the Hearst newspaper group. I don't know if you have that letter on your stuff for the chat room. If not, they can go directly to my webpage called starshipsaroundthesun.com. And they will see that web page right there on my front page.
Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
No, this one person, he said he was there and he saw this and he saw that. And yes, that's where the interdimensional race comes in. And he mentions a very important thing. During his time there watching all this stuff, he said he saw a solid object completely dematerialize before all of their eyes. Now, anyone who's ever done a check on that term from 1954 would clearly see that that term was never used until Star Trek came out in 1965. It was never used in any book, any TV show, nothing. So that puts some pretty good things in that one person's background there. Okay, Pope Pius XII put an archbishop over Bishop McIntyre, and they had a joint alliance between the United States and the Western countries to hold secret meetings here on Earth. They were also held in the Vatican Gardens. Some part during that meeting, the aliens warned President Eisenhower about upcoming natural disasters that would be caused because of a rogue planet and its brown dwarf star as they came into our system. They offered their help and support. all of which Eisenhower turned down flat and told them to get out. He told them basically that if they ever landed here again, we'd shoot them from the skies. So the aliens left, and something must have happened between their leaving and early 1955. Eisenhower went to Holloman Air Force Base in early 1955. His plane landed Air Force One. As it landed, it came to the end at the runway, and he ordered everything to be shut down. All of the radars, telephones, all communications, the gates would be shut. You see, the early version of the Doppler radar that we use now with our weather stuff was being just tested back in Roswell, New Mexico, at the base right there. The Doppler radar took out three of their ships, causing them to crash. One of the craft, 2 survivors were found in it. One was shot dead trying to escape. The other one was brought in for interrogation, I guess you might say, and they allowed him to play with they allowed it to play with one of the less damaged ships, and in a sense, he phoned home. The 3 large ships were seen by our astronomers approaching in somewhere around late 1953. That's where everything was set up for 54. Eisenhower went to Holloman in early 55. After everything was shut down, 2 flying saucers appeared. One stayed hovering above Air Force One. The other one landed right in front of Air Force One, and Eisenhower was seen leaving Air Force One and getting into the craft. Supposedly, I'm going to keep using that word because I personally don't know, but I know what has been leaked. Supposedly, he met directly with the Anunnaki. They were being called the Nordic-looking ones back then. How do I know that?
Yeah, how do you know?
Well, there's been so much stuff that's been leaked over the years. And anyway, Eisenhower met with the Anunnaki, tried to make a technical treaty with them, but they refused because they told him supposedly that the Anunnaki almost wiped out the human race back in our ancient history, and they didn't want to do it again. Plus, if we ever got into a fight with nuclear weapons here, we could possibly destroy everything on Earth and possibly damage their bases on their moon. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I do believe that there are bases not only on the moon but on Mars too, and I think I've seen some pretty credible stuff.
And that's where if anyone has read The Lost Book of Enki by Zecharia Sitchin, they would know that. They would know that, yes, there was something done up on the moon, and they would also know that the Anunnaki had made bases on Mars as a go-between with the gold, the copper, the brass, the silver, but the gold was the most important thing.
You know, some people think that Zecharia Sitchin was playing for both sides, I guess you could say.
Okay, and my friends warned me about that when they first heard I was going to be doing research on it. They told me very clearly, do not read any of Zecharia Sitchin's books, and do not read Velikovsky's stuff. It's all BS. Hopefully I can say that here on your radio show.
Oh yeah, BS is just fine. Now, were they Anunnaki, or were the Anunnaki reptilians? And I'm kind of jumping here, I'm sorry, but
I honestly don't know. I found no descriptions of what the Nordics were supposed to have been, other than they were tall, light-skinned, and they looked basically people that might come from Norway or Sweden, stuff like that. They're about 7 foot tall, give or take. That's the only description I've ever heard about them. Okay, I've heard several different things being addressed as the Anunnaki as being shapeshifters. Who knows? Okay. Now, in early 2000s, the Vatican sent out a high-ranking Jesuit priest to go and talk to Christopher Barbato. an Italian reporter. They talked, and the high-ranking priest told Barbato everything that the Vatican has known since '54. And they were just getting worried because the governments around our planet were not saying anything about this stuff. And they were hoping that Barbato would, since he was writing stuff for UFO magazines, maybe he could get the information out in that way, and it would force the governments to come public with this stuff. Barbato's works were printed only in Europe and Italy, never here in the United States. There is a mass disinformation program between the United States and Canada. So we're not hearing any of this stuff. Barbato talked to his friend Lucas Scantamburlo, another Italian reporter, and told him everything that he could. He didn't want to tell him everything. Lucas Scantamburlo did some reporting and checked out everything, and then he did his own articles. Project Camelot, which some of your listeners probably know about or don't know about.
Sure.
They have YouTube videos up under that name, and they went to Lucas Scantamburlo, and he actually did a 2-hour video for them called The Return of Planet X. You can find that on YouTube, and if you click down after it says show more, you'll see his webpage on Project Camelot. Click on that, and you can look. You can see. Here's the links for the 2 videos, and here's also the links for the text transcripts for video 1 and video 2, and several other things that he was in on. Lucas Scantamburlo did a really good job. I don't think, in my opinion, that the Project Camelot, the 2 reporters that were interviewing him, did a good enough job. They found out information, but they didn't press that information. They kind of BS'd it. And I was a little bit irritated when they didn't get as much information. They said in there that thing directly from him, and he saw what happened.
Wait, he had to jump out of the spacecraft?
Off the telephone pole.
Oh, okay.
Okay. See, President Eisenhower, he wanted to go public with all of this information in '54, but his hands were tied by Majestic 12. And that's mostly out of other people I've got research from, and from the leaks from the Vatican. So Eisenhower wanted to go public. So once he met with the Anunnaki and he found out that they still claimed the moon as theirs, he was so angered that supposedly, again, when he got back to the White House, he ordered that anything about aliens, flying saucers, were to never be mentioned in the White House ever again. And he handed the entire alien UFO stuff over to MJ-12. Now, again, supposedly, later on during his term, he was supposedly overheard regretting ever doing so, because he didn't think MJ-12 was doing it the way he would have done. Now, when Eisenhower left office, he actually did a TV special, and he talks to the public. And in that TV special, he is hinting very strongly that the public never trust the big businesses and the military because of their connections with the MJ-12, or what other people call the other government, the outside government.
The secret government. Yeah.
The secret government. Now, again, there were very strong rumors that were put into writing. I've seen them on I don't know how many different web pages, that supposedly President Eisenhower spoke privately with incoming President Kennedy and told him too much stuff. Supposedly, early in Kennedy's presidency, he went directly to a lot of the military bases and refused to talk to the officers, but talked to the enlisted men about what was going on there. Now, the BBC did an article about 10 years ago, give or take, about was President Kennedy actually killed because of his knowledge about some of the alien stuff.
I think it was a combination of things, but
Yeah, and they actually had 2 documents that they got from our government basically saying, I want this stuff on my desk before I get back from Dallas. And the dates were 10 days before he was assassinated.
you know
Now,
what's
do I know this personally? No, I do not. Am I speculating? Yes, I am.
well, there,
Okay.
yeah, and there's always going to be some speculation, but you know what strikes me kind of crazy is that it's my understanding he was warned that he should take a different route, and you know, it pretty much was tipped off that something could happen. He didn't care; he did it anyways.
Yes. I've talked to a lot of people who say virtually the same thing. Okay, how did all this stuff start out? Well, after I did my research was basically what happened here on Earth 3,600 years ago. Okay, you had the Exodus, supposedly, but you also had the ancient volcano of Thera, which is now called Santorini, erupt back then, virtually wiping out the entire island. Okay, so you've got that, you've got this. Went to China. Mozai, M-O-Z-I, in his book 5. You can go on to Google and you can search Mozai book 5, and it'll take you directly to his ancient writings, which have all been checked, they've all been transcribed into English or whatever language you need. And in his book 5, about halfway down, he talks about 3 gods came to China. And this was a time well before the first emperor. See, the first emperor, he tried to destroy all of the ancient documents before him and said he's the first emperor.
You know,
So
and that's kind of strange too, because it seems like every country or what have you, there was some evil ruler who wanted to destroy all the books.
Exactly, and he came very close to doing so. And Mozai's works were found, they were translated, and they're up on the internet. So book 5, about halfway down, tells about 3 gods who came to ancient China, and they aligned themselves with one of the warlords. And to punish the other warlords, they made sand fall from the sky for almost 10 days. Forests were set on fire. They had a massive time of heat and cold. And all this stuff was done in China. And everyone just bowed down to that one warlord. Now, going even further back in Chinese ancient history, and you can check all this stuff on Google, there was an emperor, Yahoo, Y-A-H-O-U.
Oh yeah, Yahoo. When I saw that, I says, well, that's kind of strange. And now we have Yahoo. Oh my God.
Yes, and this emperor talks about how a thing showed up in the sky, and the oceans topped the high Chinese mountains. And for 13 years, all the people that survived in China were ordered to drain the salt water from the high mountain valleys all the way down to the rivers and out to the oceans. It took them 13 years. And then he sent 4 teams. They had to look for where was north, south, east, or west. And they had to make a brand new calendar because the days had shortened. So there's plenty of ancient records that are still around. Okay, I found out all that stuff, and then I went and read Lost Book of Enki and Velikovsky's stuff, and it nailed it. Nailed it down, but good. Nibiru supposedly was going through our system for uncounted centuries until it accidentally got too close to a planet that was in the orbit where the asteroid belt is now.
I don't
it
know
used
if
to be
it was
called
an accident.
Tiamat. And one of Nibiru's moons I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying. I was like, well, I don't know if it was an accident or not, but
Well, according to the Lost Book of Enki, and because of my research, I just jumped right in line with Zacharias Sitchin. Lost Book of Enki tells it very clearly that during one of these very, very, very rare occurrences, the two planets got too close to each other, and one of Nibiru's moons smashed into Tiamat, breaking it into basically about two pieces. Small amount became the asteroid belt. The larger amount was kicked into a lower orbit, which is where the Earth is right now. One of Tiamat's moons followed what was left of Tiamat and became our moon right now. That is why the Anunnaki claim it, because they know how it happened and when. Okay, so they came here to Earth basically about 450,000 years ago. They were looking for gold to fix their atmosphere because it does a certain thing to the atmosphere. So they came here, they found it, but the Anunnaki did not like working with their hands here on Earth to dig up all the stuff. So they decided to create a worker race, not a slave race. Very clear, Lost Book of Enki says under Anunnaki law, slaves were forbidden.
so is that where this particular information comes from? From the book?
Yes.
Okay.
The book of Enoch, tablets 9 and 10 go into great detail about how they were here on Earth, and because of a very rare alignment in our system of the 7 from the Earth out to Pluto, it altered forever Nibiru's flight path through our system, bringing it closer to Mars, also bringing it closer to the Earth the same way. The first time it went through, it caused a tremendous amount of damage. The second time it came, it was going to be coming through. The Anunnaki knew, because of their scientific stuff and because of all the stuff they put down in the cold white lands, which we now call Antarctica and South Africa, they knew that the second time around was going to cause great damage here on Earth. So the leaders, Enki, Enlil, Anu, which is the king of Nibiru, and their half-sister, which I can never pronounce her name correctly. They knew exactly what was going to happen. And they didn't want the Iligi, I-G-I-G-I, the ones that came down from Mars to Earth in the Lost Book of Enoch. They took the 200 females and kept them as wives. And the Nephilim were their children, the hybrids. Those were also what in our ancient history were called the gods.
The gods, yeah.
Roman and Greek mythology, they knew the Nephilim. It's also in the Bible about these giants that came down to Earth and grabbed 200 females and had kids with them, and the giants were born from them. That's the Nephilim, the gods. Okay.
See, and before you go on, let me just say that I believe that there is a big G, and I call that God, the creator, creation is, I think, the universe, and it's so big we can't comprehend it, we can't see it all. But what I'd like to know is, now the Anunnaki, how did they get created? And I want to dig back and get all the answers. I mean, where did it all start? I kind of don't believe there was just this big bang and here we were.
That is a very slippery slope for anyone who tries to do research on any of this stuff, any of it. And I'm going to be getting into it pretty good here pretty soon. Are you going to be taking a break now? Or are you going to?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we are artists. That's what we are. Nobody controls us. That's why we can talk about things that we're talking about tonight with my guest, Robert. And Robert, we are back. And so many places to go tonight. Where do we go next?
Okay. If your listeners want to look at some of the stuff I have, these are all NASA, SOHO, stereo ahead, stereo behind, satellite camera images, and they tell for those who see what they want to see, part of the picture. They can go to starshipsaroundthesun.com and they can click on the photo section, and you have at least 20 pictures right there out of over 3,000 images I currently have. Okay, don't want to get you too tied up here for just ancient history, but the Anunnaki are clearly in our ancient history. The Anunnaki, people did many wall covering type things, nicely carved out to show them. You probably have seen them every once in a while on Ancient Aliens, some of the other shows. There's one image, which I didn't send to you, and I'm sorry I didn't, of an Anunnaki carved onto this one piece, and he's pointing towards something up in the right-hand corner. But right on his chest is a beautiful cross, and it's a special-looking cross. And I had to research the heck out of that, and it's called Cain's mark. That's what it's called. It's called a cross within a circle, and it has a certain shape and everything to it.
Oh, because
All right, that is somehow linked to the Vatican. Back in the 1100s, the Vatican told the people that became the Templars and the Hospitallers to use this certain image on their shields and on their clothes. So they went to Jerusalem, they went digging around, and about 8 years later they came racing back to Europe, and they were extremely wealthy. They found something there in Jerusalem, call it the chalice, the any of the different things you might think of from religious type. My mind's going blank on a couple of names right here. The Grail, the Holy Grail, and some other stuff. They became exceptionally wealthy. And their knights went around, did this, did that, did that. They went down to Malta, which is my wife's parents' place of birth. We just recently went there early June. That's why that cross, Maltese cross, was stuck in my head. So when I saw this wall carving, I said, whoa, that just like I know what that is. So I went and researched it down, and the Knights Templar and Hospitallers spread that all around in Europe there, the different groups. And as it turned out, from the Hospitallers, the Templars and the Hospitallers, other groups were formed. The Illuminati, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. And then it takes you off into a tear completely different, but talks more about what that, in my opinion, the Grail is a bloodline. And that's what so many shows have been talking about one way or the other. Is it a bloodline, or is it actually the Holy Grail? Okay, my opinion, it's a bloodline. It's the Anunnaki bloodline.
Would that be, you think that would go right with queens and presidents and all that?
Yes, it would. Also with Oak Island. Because all the Templars were not killed. Some of the shows say, they were all killed, don't worry about it. No, 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 no. Some of the Templars went to other countries which were against the Vatican, and they became part of their knights. Or they went to Scotland and actually helped the Scots get their first freedom with William Sinclair. That's that one church, St. Clair's Church over there in England. Okay, so I know that that's there, because I've had to research the holy heck out of it. So all this stuff goes down to basically around 1558 to 1600 BCE. What happened then? Well, you had the Exodus. The Bible's never pinned down a date. I have. The Colburn has ancient manuscripts which were hidden up until the 1100s AD. And in there, they have other accounts from an Egyptian scribe, a highly trained Egyptian scribe called Ipuwer, I-P-U-W-E-R. And in there, he tells exactly what happens during the exodus of the slaves and evildoers. Because during that time, the destroyer was in their skies for almost 10 days. The ancient Egyptians called the destroyer and also the doom ship otherwise Nibiru. It rained fire from the sky, it did this, it did that, it caused these plagues to happen, and oh, by the way, rocks falling from the sky caused the destruction of the palace of the pharaoh and killed his firstborn.
So are you then saying that Nibiru and Planet X are two different entities? Because if you are, no. Oh, because I got to thinking maybe Nibiru was like letters on the side of some giant mothership.
No. And that has been part of the misrepresentation and misunderstanding all this. Nibiru is the planet of the crossing. Now, if you put the nemesis brown dwarf interacting with our system, with Nibiru coming through between Mars and Jupiter, it makes sense, being called the planet of the crossing.
Right.
It crosses over into our system and then leaves.
Right. But at the same time now, if you think back, thousands of years ago, even let's say 3,600 years ago, people, maybe something the size like of a Star Wars Death Star, if you will, something like that. Maybe to them, it might have looked like a planet. So,
And that's entirely possible. I just know that they called it the Destroyer. And they had been calling it the Destroyer for thousands of years before 1558 BC.
Well, that's what's important, the fact that it's called the Destroyer. I'm sure it's got its name for a reason.
Yes. And all this stuff is happening, but it's nowhere in Egyptian history. And why is that? Because the Hyksos were in charge of Upper Egypt from the 12th Egyptian dynasty to the end of the 17th Egyptian dynasty. They were kicked out somewhere between 1558 and 1600 BCE, and the first Egyptian pharaoh to reunite Upper and Lower Egypt was Akhmos I. And this is a name that's not even Egyptian. It's almost Hebrew. Akhmos, or Akhmosis, which is getting some other stuff put in here too. I've tried to stay away from all the other stuff just so I can tell the story here. Okay, during the time of all this major stuff that's happening, the slaves and evildoers and a huge amount of Egyptians took off out of what's called Avaris, which was their the Hyksos capital. And for 7 days they walked up towards the Mediterranean, and they were stopped at a saltwater marsh. It was too deep to go through, and they knew Pharaoh was coming after them. And Pharaoh did go after them. Pharaoh grabbed all of his troops and took off, went from town to town. Each town had been looted. All the records were smashed, granaries were looted, everything was just complete turmoil. So he followed. These slaves and evildoers were coming back. Okay, this is an Egyptian version, so they don't mention anyone's names. They caught up with them. Oh, let me back up here a second. They were all led by a priest prince from the inner courtyard of Pharaoh, and that's very clear in his accounts. So Pharaoh caught up with them. Now, during this time, there's been heavy tectonic activity. The ground has been dropping, it's been shaking really heavily, all this stuff, fire coming out of the ground, and oh, by the way, ash is falling all over Egypt. Ash from a volcano. Now, how many volcanoes are down here in Egypt or anywhere near Egypt? So that's clear in the account. So he catches up with them, and then he sees them down here, and they're all fighting amongst themselves, and for some reason this thing in the sky is causing a sound that is being described as 10,000 trumpets all yelling at the same time. And they have to listen to this, and it's almost deafening to them. Then Pharaoh goes in and attacks them. The priest prince from the inner courtyard of Pharaoh leads him across the saltwater marsh because the ground beneath it had risen up, leaving nothing but mud. So they're racing across, and there's a tail end which stands and fights Pharaoh. So they're fighting in this saltwater marsh, and everything just goes nuts. Then a tremendous roar is heard in the skies. A tremendous roar they had never heard before. And then the water rushes out into the Mediterranean. That tells you a tsunami is coming. If anyone remembers 2004, when the big tsunami hit most of Sumatra and stuff, that's exactly what happened. So this tremendous roar stops them. Now, IPROR doesn't say how long they were stopped, when did they get back going, or what. All he says, here's this gigantic tsunami coming in and just washes Pharaoh and these hind people that were fighting, just washes them all away and floods most of Egypt. That's how big this tsunami was. Now, what would cause a tsunami back then? The eruption of Thera up in the Greek islands. Its tsunami just washed right over Crete and almost destroyed everything that was there and pushed the palace of Knossos almost, I guess, 20 or 30 feet from its foundations. Okay? That's the only thing that marks that date in time, between 1558 and 1600 BC. Go on Google, do a search on it. Almost everyone says that same time period. The remnants of the chariots were found at the bottom of the Red Sea about 20 years ago, and they date to the end of the 17th Egyptian dynasty, right then and there. Ahmose I was pharaoh in 1550 BCE. There's another thing your listeners can go dig up. It's called the Tempest Stele, S-T-E-L-E, of Ahmose I. Now, this stela, Ahmose had ordered being built to commemorate everything he had to rebuild in Egypt. So many things were destroyed or undermined, and it's all in hieroglyphics. And oh, by the way, the pyramids had collapsed. In Egyptian hieroglyphics, the pyramids had collapsed. Anyone that looks at the three pyramids down there, they all should be wondering why the outside stuff is not there, and only one of them has stuff way up there at the very top.
Well, I'll tell you another question I got about those pyramids is, why are there pyramids that would appear to be pyramids on Mars as well, that would almost match what we've got here on Earth, right?
An excellent question. If supposedly they are pyramids. And if they are, and NASA hasn't been telling us, just like that face that was seen on Mars, and they went back years later and they took another picture. Nah, don't worry, that it was just a fate. It was just a funny trick of light on that one day. But there is a big base up there, and I know it's there. I've seen the pictures of it. I've read remote viewer Dr. Courtney Brown's account of it.
Oh yeah, we just had him on I think a week ago.
He is fantastic, and I'll be getting back to him in a little bit. Anyway, so Nibiru was here between 1658 and 1600 BCE. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now we race to the future. Eisenhower met with them in 54, 55. Supposedly all the secret meetings are still being held. The Vatican knew everything about it. All the popes knew it after Pope Pius XII. The next pope right after Pope Pius XII was talked about that he was actually dealing with the aliens even then, but he wanted to keep his arms away from them, keep them separate. So the Secret Service, being part of the Vatican, their own version, kept him away from a certain area, and it knows exactly where to look, and it finds it. It finds a heat signature which is between 4 to 8 times the size of the Earth. And someone at NASA says, hey, let's do a news conference real quick. We don't have to talk to those upper people. So they do a news conference, and they tell several different major papers, and boom, it's right there. Several days later, NASA says, no, that wasn't what happened. Don't worry about it, guys. Sorry, we made a mistake here. We didn't see anything out there. So it was all retracted.
It always is, right?
Yes, but in private scientist-type stuff, here's this little part here saying we've sent these 2 probes out, and they're being diverted to look for this, and it's actually showing Nibiru and its dwarf star, and it's showing all this different stuff, and it was shown in different things that were just leaked over the years. Okay, NASA put up several different groups to work on this stuff. One of the famous scientists was Robert S. Harrington from the Naval Institute, and he led his own group. I don't have the names of all the people that were in his group, but I have some possibilities. And the two, okay, Robert S. Harrington had a falling out with NASA. It's very clear. And he was going to go public with everything he knew. He knew that Nibiru had its own orbit, not an elliptical orbit, which everyone else has been hearing around stuff. And he knew that the ecliptic angle of Nibiru coming through our system was between 30 and 40 degrees, or something around there. So he knew all that from his own research, stuff NASA was giving him. So just before he was getting ready to do his news conference in I think it was 1992, he died suddenly from a very rare form of cancer that no one ever heard he knew about. Just like the movie 2012, when the dude from the Louvre was killed accidentally or deliberately before he was going to hold his own news conference. See, Hollywood has been dropping hints for a long time now, a very long time. See if maybe some of your listeners know about that. So he's killed, but in the mid-90s, Area 51 designs and builds with alien help. This was all on that transcript from Lucas Scantamburlo with the Project Camelot videos. They built a very advanced space probe. This space probe was taken into orbit by the Aurora craft. From Earth, it went straight out past Pluto, met up with Nibiru, orbited it, and videotaped it. What it did other than that, I have no idea. I just have the account that was told by Lucas Scantamburlo. Eventually, the craft returned to Earth very fast. It makes NASA and its slow-moving stuff look like something I cannot say on your show.
Now, let's say this Planet X it's supposed to come in between the Earth and the Sun, correct?
No. That's another misunderstanding.
Well, do tell.
Nibiru never comes. Okay, the Nibiru orbits through our system clockwise, just like Sedna does. Everything in our system except for Pluto orbits counterclockwise. So Nibiru comes in right between where the asteroid belt is. It never comes any closer to the Earth than the asteroid belt. But according to the Lost Book of Enki, it has a very intense gravitational pull and a very intense magnetic field that it sends out.
A pull and a push, I'm sure.
Yes. So Nibiru, since it comes through at an angle, it goes down below our sun and comes up from below, and then goes back out about the same space between the asteroid belt. So what we would see is just exactly what is being told in Tablet 9 and 10 in the Lost Book of Enki. The Anunnaki knew that Nibiru was going to be coming up from below our system, and they were watching for it because they knew what it would do, or they had a good enough idea what it would do. And as Nibiru was starting to be seen as a red star or a reddish-looking planet in the southern regions of the Earth, they knew that the higher Anunnaki, not the IGIs that had come here and did all their damage, but they were all going to go up to their spacecraft and get off the Earth. See, Enlil knew exactly what would happen, but he thought he had a good idea here to not only erase the humans, and he had a racial hatred against the humans, even though he married one and had sex with several, just as Enki and a whole bunch of the other Anunnaki did. He had a racial hatred against us. Very clear from the Lost Book of Enki.
Nice.
So he wanted nothing to be told to the humans or anyone else, and he made Enki, their half-sister, swear to it. Enki went beyond his bounds and went to what's now called Noah. And that's the other account I sent to you. That's also found in the Colburn, telling how Noah was told through a reed, a wall during it, and he thought it was a dream, supposedly, and told him exactly what to do and where to build the ship. Now, just like in the movie 2012, he knew that the ship had to be built way up in the mountains because the water would come up to them. And all the dimensions are exactly as everyone has found in the Bible, cubit by cubit. No ifs, ands, or buts. But he details very clearly how the ark would be built. It has 3 decks. The heavier animals were on the lower deck. Birds and bird fowl type were on the second deck. And each deck was divided between, so, making it like 6 decks right there. The third deck had the king, his personal family, and it just goes right down the line telling he had this person, that person, all the way. Each craft that they could do, making beer, making this, making that, dancing, God knows what. They grabbed one person that was a specialist in all of this, and they were to be on board the ship. They also allowed to have the last, I think it was 6 strangers that were anywhere near the ark before they closed the doors. To this stuff.
Yeah.
In about 2006, I started really getting interested in the YouTube videos about Nibiru is here. Nibiru is here, and they were giving sky coordinates for Google Sky Earth and for worldwide telescope, and I think there's 2 or 3 other free things. And I was actually looking these things right up on the internet. And everywhere it said to look for, NASA or someone else had blanked out what the whole image looked like. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just clearing my throat. Sorry about that. But I know exactly what you're talking about. And that don't make any sense to me. Even though I've had some trolls come to me and try to make up good excuses for it, it's still no excuse for it.
Well, I sent those coordinates, sky coordinates, into a friend of mine that's still at NASA. Can't mention his name or anything else about him. And he sent me back a DSS. This is an image of what you would physically see through a telescope. And this image is on your webpage, probably in your chat room, where you have 5, almost 6 white dots orbiting around something. Okay, that really kind of set me going here. Okay, cool, because everything I mostly had read or heard about brown dwarf stars said a brown dwarf cannot be seen unless you're using infrared or microwaves.
Now, let me give you just really quick a good argument that somebody has made with me. Somebody who I've classified as a troll. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
they did bring up one good point, and that is even an object that you would need infrared to see. If it got close enough, once it got close enough, like even like near where Jupiter is, I mean, we could see Jupiter because light reflects off it. So if it got close enough, we'd be able to see it, right?
Yes, and it really works for something solid that had physically come into our system. Okay, now we're stepping into a different part here. We're going to be talking about Nemesis. NASA actually imaged a lot of this stuff back in 2007, 2008, where they actually have a infrared image of our brown dwarf companion to our sun. It's called Nemesis. Nemesis has its own little system. Its system has 7 planets. Believe it or not, it does. The brown dwarf system, being a companion to our sun, orbits around our sun over a long period of time, like 26,000 years, as it makes one complete orbit around our sun. Its 7 planets, only a few of those planets actually interact with our solar system. 2 of them that I know of right now is Nibiru, is planet number 6, and Sedna is the outermost planet of Nemesis. Sedna has been actually being seen on several astronomy programs. I use astroviewer.com. And in AstroViewer, I took several of the images and I sent them to your show so the visitors and listeners can actually see what AstroViewer shows. It shows that Sedna has a massive orbit all the way around our system, and our system is down towards one corner of Sedna's orbit. And that's all explained when you go to YouTube and look for a video from about Nemesis, the evil twin to our sun. It's about a 50-minute video, and they go into it in complete detail. They talk about Nemesis, and they talk about exactly what the system would look like, which is a direct match for what I show in the stuff I have.
Fantastic. Now, I've seen the picture with the objects that you were just talking about, and that is up on the website, so everyone can go. If you're in the chat and listen page, where it's probably where you are, if you're listening, then scroll down, you'll see a picture slider, and those pictures are in that slider for you to check out. Now, how do we know what that is, what that's a picture of? How do we know?
Okay. All you see in those pictures is the orbit of Sedna. Sedna has a tremendous orbit, and it's virtually round. The only thing that will give it a round orbit is if it's orbiting around something. So something is missing right in the middle of that orbit. Another group made created a PowerPoint slide set of 8 slides a while back in 2009. Can't mention their name, from leaked information from NASA. And in those slides, they show the 6 planets which orbits around Nemesis, the brown dwarf. And 1 through 8 takes you from 2009 till December 21st of 2012. As of 2012, Nibiru, which was planet number 6, was only about 20 AUs. That's astronomic units, which is like from the Earth to the Sun, 93 million miles for 1 AU. And it said in there, it projected that Nibiru would be that far away as of December 21st, 2012. So if you take that image right there, put that within, I'm going to try and have that done pretty soon, and it will clearly show all 7 planets in this one system.
Now I'm looking at the pictures now as they slide through, and so these graphs, who made these graphs with the orbits and such?
Those were made by another group, which I can't get into because stuff was created by them.
That's fine, but you know who created them, though.
Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
And they clearly show all the planets orbiting 1 through 8. You can clearly see all 6 planets as they slowly orbit around Nemesis. Now, for them to know that as well as they could to create what they had, they got fantastic information from NASA. And the person at NASA doesn't want anyone to know who that person is. So our governments around the planet have known about this since at least 1954. President Eisenhower made a big mistake back then. He personally invited the Bishop of Los Angeles, Francis M. McIntyre, to be his spiritual advisor at a very secret meeting down in what used to be called Muroc Airfield. It's now called Edwards Air Force Base. That is where Eisenhower met with a hand-picked Western team of scientists. They met with 3 alien races they had set down. Supposedly, one was the Greys, the second was a reptilian-looking race,